My name is Rick Silver. I'm a psychiatrist. I'll tell you a little bit more about the program that I work in just a moment. But I'm here to talk about the failure to launch population, which we sometimes call the struggling to launch population. And this is the very emotionally complex subset of the more general emerging adult population that we're all interested in. The program that I'm in is called Heron's Gate, which is an outpatient treatment program for this population, and it's designed specifically to move them from developmental stagnation, if you will, or paralysis to launch. And I want to make a distinction here today about some of the differences in what I'll be presenting and what we've heard in some of the other discussions. When Brent Roberts spoke this morning, and he's an academician and a researcher, which is a valid way to spend your time, he said when he was confronted with this woman whose child was struggling, that he did the sensible thing in the face of a crisis. He fled in the other direction, right? So I, unfortunately, am not an academician. I'm a clinician, I'm a therapist, I'm a treatment provider. So what we do when we're faced with crisis is we run towards it. Not a very adaptive way of dealing with things. But I tell you this by way of saying my information, my stories will come from that much more clinical and treatment perspective as opposed to a research perspective. Okay, now, in today's talk, there is one key idea that I'd like to put forth, and that is this: that because of the nature, the complexity, the depth of the developmental challenges that's faced by the emerging adult, the failure to launch adult population as they are growing up, that any treatment program that is going to serve them well has got to enthusiastically apply the power of community, the power of relationship, and the power of love, if you will, in order to help them move from where they are now to being productive and engaged and motivated individuals. In other words, what's happened with these young adults is that they've been so confronted by so many developmental dilemmas that they've basically closed themselves down like a seed, in a sense, and put this emotional husk about themselves. And they need to, in order to protect their hearts and to protect what's most tender to them. And it's my experience in the work that we've done in Heron's Gate that the only way that you can really open up these seeds again is in the rich soil of community. And there the seeds will open and they will release these sparks of life, if you will, that have been hidden so deeply and so long. Let me offer an illustration with one of my patients. We'll call her Suzanne, that's not her name. She came to us about 1.5 years ago. And at that time she made 2 claims for herself. Number 1 was, I will never trust anybody, and number 2 was that I have no sense of future for myself. And this was quite understandable because Suzanne had come from a home where she was a survivor of significant sexual abuse and also emotional trauma because she had a mother who had died when the patient was 18 from alcoholism. So we've worked with her for a while, and we have found that despite her initial protestations, that she has really blossomed into this beautiful, outgoing, vibrant young woman, caring and loving. So we spoke with her a little while ago and said, Suzanne, what's changed for you? How is it that now you are able to access what your own gifts and your own passions are? How is it that you're able to articulate some vision for your future? And she thought for a minute and she said, unconditional love, respect, caring, support, but most importantly, community. Because in this community of Heron's Gate, I've been able to make connections with my peers and form trusting relationships with the adults in my life that I never had before. Suzanne said, when I'm in this community, I feel home. So, unconditional love, home. Relationships that accept her for who she is, where she is, without blame, warts and all, without judgment. These were the elements of community that Suzanne needed in order for her to form that safe, sacred space in her heart so she could release some of her suffering and she could finally access what was truly, deeply her authentic self. So you see, you work with these young adults for a long time and you see them blossoming into these brilliant, wonderful people, and the question that keeps coming to mind for me is, What happened? How is it that people get so stuck? How is it that there is this complex web of biological and family and developmental factors that weighs them down, that kind of holds them captive in this Gordian knot of the soul? Let me offer another story about a young man that I've worked with for many years, that our team has worked with for many years. And I think it'll give us a sense of the depth of the issues that these young adults who are failure to launch are dealing with. Now, I'm going to read this because I'm 62, and I tried like heck to memorize all 18 minutes of my TED Talk. It wasn't going to work. So I'm going to read you this story. I think you'll find it equally entertaining. Okay. Scott was 18, and he pretty much lied to me about everything from the first appointment. Yeah, I'm keeping up with my schoolwork. Oh, yeah, I clean my room just like my parents asked me to. Oh, I'm not smoking as much weed. Yeah, I'm being careful with my money. The truth never came easily to him. He wrapped his life in layers of half-truths, deceptions, and out-and-out lies. The young man before me was only a facade. Pleasing, cooperative, always making the effort, always moving forward. Except that he wasn't really any of those things. Not once you got him comfortable and you began to see through the cracks in the facade. He'd given up, he told me. 4 years of depression in high school, alternating with mania that tore away his emotional foundation, ADHD that kept him from performing well in school, and parents who loved him dearly but criticized him endlessly. He'd given up on school, on parents, on his passions, on ever being happy again. His thin veneer was all that was left, and for better or for worse, it was his badge of courage, his sign to the world that he still had what it took, and he clung to this shield like a warrior. How do you recover from the relentless slide toward your own dark abyss when the facade falls away and the hungry eyes of your soul stare at you wide, green, and glowing like some animal in the night? If he'd had just a bit more strength, some secret untapped reserve of light that he could have used to wash back his darkness, perhaps then he could have gathered the broken stones of his life and created a more worthy edifice. But he had nothing. Nothing but to watch helplessly as his life shattered, splintered crazily, the pieces spinning into chaos, the center gone. I saw him shortly after he'd gotten out of the hospital. He'd overdosed on Tylenol, and he'd come pretty near to dying. Not unlike others who had visited that very dark edge, he came back a changed person. Quiet and sure now, he'd given up the facile response, trading it for words that gave a truer measure of the reach of his soul's wisdom. What's different? I asked him. He told me how when he was on the psych ward, he'd noticed how the staff liked him, complimented him, pointed out his strengths. Surprised at first, it began to dawn on him that his soul was mirrored in the loving eyes of others. That behind the veneer, they saw not failure and shame, but a gentle, kind young man with an inner strength beyond what he'd ever imagined. Some may say that trying to kill oneself is the act of a coward, but how can any of us know what we would do when faced with the deep despair and repeated failure and grinding shame that he had in his life? In giving up, this young man did the only thing that he could do. He fell apart. He let go of everything. He gave himself over to a caring and a love that he'd been unable to find for himself. And in the process, he discovered his own strengths, his own gifts, his own courage. This is a story that we see repeated again and again with the failure to launch population, each person, of course, with their own unique details. It's a story of multiple risk factors piling on year after year that eventually completely derail the person's developmental trajectory. Risk factors like brains that are hardwired for mental illness, family dysfunction, school isolation, academic failure, self-loathing, physical and sexual trauma. So we know the risk factors over here. How do we get to this developmental paralysis over here? What are the underlying psychological processes that bring us there? So let me borrow from self-determination theory for a bit and talk how that might be a useful framework for understanding this process. So self-determination theory posits that we all have these fundamental drives for self-realization, self-actualization, to reach our potential as fully as we possibly can in our lives. And that process of self-actualization occurs when it is fueled by the requisite amount of intrinsic motivation. Well, where does intrinsic motivation come from? This drive to approach life energetically and enthusiastically. Where does that come from? Again, this theory posits that there are three basic human needs that have to be fulfilled by a nurturing environment. The need for relatedness, the need for competence, the need for autonomy. So relatedness, I can have a relationship with you which is deeply emotionally intimate, fulfilling for both of us, gives us both a sense of purpose and meaning in our lives. Competence, I've got that can-do in my social, financial, academic, employment, family realms. And then autonomy, well, because I'm connected to people, and because I know I can do things well, I can see my future in front of me, and I want to make sure that the decisions that I make today are going to lead to a productive, independent future. Resilience also arises in this nurturing setting because we bounced ourselves off the world so many times against its emotional challenges that we know we can respond in a very adaptive way to stress. Okay, now, here's the kicker in all this. The full development or blossoming of all of these positive psychological traits that we've reviewed, the autonomy, the competence, the relatedness, the intrinsic motivation, the resilience, the self-actualization, all of those traits, their development is predicated on the presence of a loving, nurturing home, as well as the emotional gains that we derive from other supportive communities, social, academic, employment. But the failure to launch young adult population is not held consistently by nurturing communities and relationships, but by a world that to them often feels rejecting, bullying, abusive, isolating, abandoning, critical. So what develops instead in these risk-heavy communities that intentionally or not keep emotionally wounding these people? What develops instead is a sense of learned helplessness. Why bother? It doesn't matter if I go to school, it doesn't matter if I drug or drink, it doesn't matter if I make a friend or not, it doesn't matter if I have a job or not, because one way or another I'm going to screw up. And I'm going to get yelled at, and I'm going to feel bad about myself, and it's just going to be another negative outcome. So why bother trying? I think that this trait of of learned helplessness is really the single most problematic emotional trait that we see among the failure to launch population. Because once it has shown up, it signals, for the present at least, not forever, thank God, but for the present at least, that we have temporarily lost the battle for competence, for relatedness, for intrinsic motivation, for self-actualization. Okay. Let's come back to community, relationship, and love. These are the tools that I think we have to work with these young adults. Now, they seem almost insignificant in the face of the job that we have turned over to them, which is to help these young adults develop into independent, motivated, self-loving people. How do you change the course of someone's river, if you will, that has been carving its sinuous, tortured path for 20 years? How indeed? So despite this grim picture that I've been painting, there is thankfully a lot of hope here, because we know that the human spirit remains resilient. Even in the face of all the troubles that these young adults have encountered as they've been growing up, their spirit still remains resilient. And with the right nurturing, with the right community, they can be brought forth and channeled into positive growth. How do we begin this process? Well, you spend some time with them, and you listen carefully, and you watch intently, and you begin to see that behind that emotional husk that they've put up, that there is this yearning, there's this reaching for the future, this brilliance, this stubbornness of the spirit. And you can begin to imagine their identities, these vague mists of their identities beginning to coalesce into something more solid and tangible and enduring. And if you watch carefully, you can see the shapes of their tomorrows as entrepreneurs and as craftspeople and as teachers and as healthcare professionals. You can imagine them as parents and as lovers and as friends. And if you listen carefully, you will hear that beneath this surface message of "I'm giving up" is a strong, continuous voice that keeps saying, "I will not quit, I will endure, and I will," as Maya Angelou so beautifully and aptly wrote, "I will rise again." So you begin to believe in them and hope for them. And you realize in time that you, as a practitioner, have a single, clear, ringing message for them, which is not, "I'm here to fix your broken soul," but rather, "I am here to help inspire you. I am here to help you breathe life into that still glowing ember of your spirit so it can burn intensely with passion. I'm here to bring you back to life in all of its possibilities for all of your dreams." So we believe, we listen, we watch. This is how we begin. But then the question is, okay, how do you take this notion of the power of community, the power of relationship, the power of love, and apply it in a practical way to these people so we can help them change? In most traditional mental health programs, these young adults will see their therapist maybe once a week, and they'll see their psychiatrist 15 to 30 minutes a month, or perhaps every 3 months. I've done this myself with this population. I can tell you categorically, it does not work for producing the kind of lasting change that is necessary to move these young adults into launch. It doesn't work. So what works? First, you don't need 1 or 2 people. You need a team of committed, coordinated professionals, multidisciplinary, who understand that the person in front of them, the identified patient of the failure to launch young adult, is not the only patient, but the family is the entire patient, and that they all need to be part of treatment. 2, you need to create peer social experiences, groups, where these young adults can feel accepted, supported, and safe. These groups become their transitional families, their tribes, their homes, in which they can begin to trust, to build deep relationships, to brag about their accomplishments, to develop a sense of self-esteem and purpose in their lives. Third, praise, model, teach, correct endlessly, not just in the one-on-one appointments, not tomorrow, but now. In the groups, in the hallways, in informal chats, by text, by email, become what I call lovingly intrusive in their lives. Fourth, be there when they need you, because their window of spin-out is not weeks and months. Their window of spin-out recovery is maybe hours or days. So you need to do what I call real-time therapy. 5, give them ample opportunity to succeed and to fail. Help them set specific, achievable goals growing from their own strengths and passions. Catch them succeeding at every little thing they do. Hold them when they fall and praise them for the strength to try again and to learn from their mistakes. Normalize their failures. 6, expect that they will interact with the community through volunteer efforts and internships and jobs. Why? Because they need to see that their showing up matters. They have to have a sense that their own lives, the meaning of their lives, can come from touching the lives of those around them. Finally, dream with them. Entertain all possibilities. Help them see their futures as exciting lands that they want to travel to. Community, relationship, love. When we join with these young adults that we have been given the honor to serve, when we build with them the surrogate families and communities that gently correct the missteps of their families of origins, when we mirror the goodness in their hearts by being fully present, by being patient with them, it is then and only then that we will witness the miracle of their river-changing course, of their shell opening and offering this beautiful pearl inside. And with time, we will witness as well the miracles of our young adults launching confidently and proudly into their new lives of independence. Now, what happened to Scott? Scott now works at Heron's Gate as a peer counselor with other young adults who are struggling to find their own paths with hope and light. The work is slow, it's hard, it's frustrating. But he finds that with patience, he can watch their transformation, watch how his caring invites them to discover a self beyond the lies, an authentic self rooted in love and filled with a sense of possibility for a better life. Thank you.